The video will start in just a few moments, or you could choose from the following chapters. Okay, now that we've learned a little bit about the Feature Manager, I know you're getting kind of impatient. Let's go ahead and jump into modeling. Now, we just did our 2-minute part, and what I'd like to do is kind of slow down a little bit and maybe talk about some of the steps that we took so you can follow it a little bit better. So just like before, we're going to go ahead and start a new document. There's 3 documents that can be opened with SolidWorks, or worked on even, and that's going to be the part, the assembly, and the drawing. And of course, none of the latter 2 can be worked on unless you actually create a part. So you need to start with a part. From parts, you can put together an assembly, and from parts, you could also put those into drawings. But we'll cover that in more detail later. So the way to do that, you just want to go to New. One of 2 ways: you can go to the menu bar and go to File, New, and scroll down and pick New there, or you can just go over here to the New button in that neighborhood just next to it and just click on New. We're going to go and choose Part as opposed to Assembly or Drawing, and again, we don't have any parts yet made, so we can't do an assembly or a drawing. So we're going to go and click on this, and it's going to give us our screen. So the Feature Manager should look very familiar to you. We haven't saved it yet, so it's still called Part 1. We're going to do a little bit of modeling first, and we're going to go ahead and save this later. So we're going to go, just to start this, we know about the Feature Manager tree, so remember, go back to the previous videos if you're unfamiliar with some of this or just need a refresher. But we're going to jump right into this. So one thing you want to do is you want to choose the material. If you know what material you're going to be using, and go ahead and define that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on material, and I'm going to choose brass out of my shortcut favorite menu that's there. So now that that's established, what you want it to do is you want to think about the orientation of your part. If it's a door, maybe choose the right or front plane. If it's something that's going to be placed on a floor, perhaps the top plane would be a good choice. For the hinge plate, it could be in any orientation, and the Saros mechanism, you can see it's not only in the top view, but it could be in the right and the front view too. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the top plane, just because we started doing that before. So we're going to choose the top plane. And what that does is it selects that so that when we go up here to our Sketch tab under Command Manager, we're going to go and choose a center rectangle. It's going to automatically assume we're going to put it on the top plane, and we're going to go from there. If you didn't choose a plane, just went up here and clicked on an element up here, now it's asking for a choice. So that's an alternative too. So we're going to choose the top plane. But one drawback to that is, now we're already starting with that center rectangle, is that plane doesn't really orient itself parallel to the screen that we saw before. So there are some drawbacks to doing it that way. I think the best approach is just to choose the plane first and then sketch in that plane. I think it will take a fewer steps. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and rebuild. What rebuild does is takes you out of the Properties Manager and puts you back to where you were before. So here are the steps. We're going to choose top plane. Go up here to our Sketch tab and our Feature Manager. We're going to choose Center Rectangle. It shows us where the top plane is. Your plane might be in a different orientation. Just because we were just goofing around with this, it's usually right there in the middle. But we're going to go ahead and choose the center of this, the origin, where the origin is. And if you remember from the previous video, the origin is the intersection of all 3 of the primary planes. So when you sketch from the origin, you have it right there in the middle. So you're going to have the planes on either side of that. And when we do an extrude, if we do a mid-plane extrude in this, as we did before, we're going to have a plane right through the middle of that too. So bottom line, if your part is symmetrical, design it with symmetry. So kind of roughly sketch out a square as we talked about before. And we're going to go over here to Smart Dimension. We're going to put a dimension in that of 4 inches. It might be 5 or 6, somewhere in that neighborhood. And we're just going to type in 4. So what that does is it brings up a dialog box. Now let's just back up this one more time. I'm going to take that dimension and delete it. What we are dimensioning is just this line. We don't have to pick that point or this point like you have to on AutoCAD. Just pick the line and drag that dimension out. And I did that with my left mouse button. And if I click my left mouse button one more time, it drops that dimension in the physical environment back there in the graphics area, and it gives us this dialog box. And it's got that all highlighted, so if you just go to our number pad and type in 4, it's going to use it as a dimension, go to the green check mark, and then we're ready to go. So what it does is it kind of scaled the model still to fit the screen. In the old days, you used to, to make the model either really big or really small. You had to adjust to take a look at that, but I think that was an enhancement back in 2015. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things here. In the next two segments of this video, I'd like to talk about constraints and sketch relations. So these are your sketch relations over here. You have vertical and horizontal and a bunch of coincidents over here. And we also have a dimension. Between those two elements in here, we're going to get a fully defined sketch. And if, as I iterated in class, you need to have a good sketch geometry in order to have a good robust model. If you have a lot of potential errors that might occur in your sketch, if you don't have it put together correctly, or if it's not really restrained, it has ability to move around and change while you're doing modeling, it could run into problems later. So you need to make sure you get all your sketch geometry down first, and then you can make modifications to it later if needed. So the way you do that is you have dimensions, you have sketch relations. So let's talk about dimensions first. We have a 4-inch dimension over here, and what they did with the sketch relations that we have here is it made it so that this line is always going to be 2 inches from the origin, or 2 inches from the front plane, I should say. This is the front over here, so we're actually looking at the front this way, looking to the right from that direction, and looking down on the top plane. So if you take a look at the front plane, your planes might be in a little bit different orientation. You can see it here. So what that dimension implies is that line is always going to be 2 inches from the front plane, and down here this line is always going to be 2 inches from that front plane. And this is where line colors come in. That line represents it being fully defined. The ends aren't fully defined. The ends still have a blue point to it, which means it can stretch. So I'm going to do escape a couple times to get us out of the smart dimension. And if we grab that point and move that, you can see that. The line is always going to be 2 inches from the front plane, but the endpoints in the line have not been defined, and they could be defined. And this is what I mean about the model potentially moving on you later and causing an error, because you can take this point and actually move it over here. It kind of looks like it's spinning around a little bit, but it's there are parts of this sketch that you're looking at that have not been fully defined, and we're going to go ahead and do that. So we can put another dimension up here, another 4-inch dimension up here, and that'll define it, or maybe make that 6 inches perhaps. And now you can see it. Now everything's black, everything's fully defined. So we're going to try to take that point and try to move it. Not going to let us do it, which is good. So let's take that dimension. You don't want to click on the number of the dimension. If you click on the number of the dimension, it's going to give you the capacity to change that number. If you click on the line of the dimension with the delete key, you can go ahead and delete that. So now we're back in the state that we were before. So let's talk more about some of the constraints in our sketch here, and most notably are going to be the sketch relations. Now, depending on what you sketch out, we sketched out a center rectangle, which means it's automatically going to give us some horizontal and vertical sketch relations. And the way these work, if you take your cursor and just rest it over that relation, which is this little blue box down here with some sort of symbol in it, very simple symbol. This one shows a vertical line, and this one shows a horizontal line. So if you look at this one, this is a vertical sketch relation. It shows you the purple line or the magenta line that it's impacting. So that line is going to be vertical. If you rest your cursor over this one, that line is going to be vertical. This one's going to be horizontal, that one's going to be horizontal. You have a bunch of coincident in the middle. So if you rest on this one, that implies that that point, and that's a sketch tool up here, you have a point up here that you could use. There's a point that's right on that line. It's not in the center of that line, but it's on that line. And if you rest over that, you can see that that point's coincident with that line. This point over here, let's see, that one on the top is going to be coincident with that line. So that point conceivably has the capacity to move up and down those lines. But once you have that coincident relationship on both of those lines, they will meet in the middle. By nature, they just meet in the middle. By geometry, they will meet in the middle. This last sketch relation means that that point is going to be coincident with the origin that's sitting in the background. So all those elements together will fully define our model. Now you'll still see blue lines in here. Blue lines, that's a examination question. Those blue lines mean that your model is yet to be fully defined. We know that because we have motion here. But let's go ahead and constrain this in one more way. Let's add a sketch relation. We're going to go ahead and click on this line with our left mouse button. With the control key to press and left mouse button again, we're going to go ahead and select that line. We have two lines selected. And if we go over here to the Properties Manager and scroll down, we have a bunch of different relationships we can define. If we're going to make those perpendicular, nothing bad will happen necessarily. Although SolidWorks doesn't like redundancy, it would be redundant if we did that. What we really want to do is we want to make those two lines equal to each other. Of course, if we were to do something different, like maybe make those parallel to each other, guess what? Now you can see some other ugly SolidWorks colors. You have reds and yellows in here too. So we're going to do Control Z, kind of get us out of that. And let's choose something else. If we do perpendicular, it'll do perpendicular. It won't throw it an error. Again, SolidWorks doesn't like redundancy. So sometimes, and especially with dimensions, if we were to put another dimension like maybe on this side for 4 inches, not going to like that. And I'll demonstrate that here in a moment. So let's not do that perpendicular dimension sketch relation, just to avoid any potential of having redundancy in there and maybe errors later. So again, this line with the control key. Let's go to our selection in here, and let's do this a little bit different. If we slow down a little bit, there's going to be a shortcut menu that pops up with the cursor. And what we want to do is we want to make those equal to each other. And once we do that, if we click to the outside, or eventually that dialog box will just fade away. Now we can see another sketch relation in here. That's the equal one. So if we rest our mouse over that one, you can see a magenta preview of the items that are going to be impacted. If we actually click on it, then it turns pink. But it's still the same thing. It shows you the lines are being impacted by it, and they're both going to be equal to each other. So now our model's fully constrained, and let's just do something else real quick. Let's put a smart dimension up here. We know it's going to be 4. If we were to put that dimension up there, guess what? Not going to like it. It's going to automatically put an error in here. It's going to give us those yellow lines again. And what it's saying is it's going to be overdefined. We're putting too many elements in here that are trying to define the sketch, and it's being redundant. It doesn't like that. So it gives us this dialog box. It says, adding this dimension will make the sketch overdefined. What do you want to do? By default, it's going to say make this dimension driven, which is what we're going to select ultimately. Or we can make this dimension driving. If we do that, then we can come back and erase those equal sketch relations, and that'll be okay. And if we don't want to see this ever again and just have that error allowing us to correct it ourselves, we could do that. But we're going to make that dimension driven, and we're going to go to OK. So now that dimension's there, we could use that just to track, but it's gray in the background. This is black, which means we can define it. If we were to click on it, we can change that value. Double click on it gives us a bigger dialog. If we were to double click on this, it's not going to let us change it. It's driven by the geometry that's already in the model. So if we were to take that 4-inch dimension to make that 5 inches, guess what? That's 5 inches too. So let's change that back to 4. And then we'll go from there. So those are constraints. Constraints are defined by dimensions and sketch relations. The ultimate desire is to get a sketch that's all the elements in that sketch, all the sketch elements in that sketch are going to be black, which means it's fully defined. Okay, so if we take a look at what we've done so far, we have a fully defined sketch. We have 2 different kinds of dimensions on this. We have a driving dimension, which drives the shape of the sketch that we have in here, and when it's being driven, this is going to follow that dimension because we have these 2 equal constraints in here, sketch relations. If you look at our Feature Manager tree so far, we have part number 1. We haven't named this. We're going to name that here in just a bit. And then we have our sketch 2 down here. Yours might say sketch 1, just because we've been playing around with this a little bit. It automatically will assume that if we close our sketch 1, next one's going to be sketch 2, and then sketch 3, and so on and so forth. As we're looking at this right now, we're ready for our 3D feature. Everything's defined in 2D. Now we get to do something 3D with it. So if you go to the Feature tab up here on our Command Manager, let's go ahead and click on that. Let's go to Extruded Boss Space. And you notice it flips it sideways so we can get kind of an isometric view of what we're doing here. And if we zoom in on this with the middle mouse button, the scroll button over here, and take a look at this, you'll notice that it's extruding off in one direction. Now, we're sketching on the top plane, so the desire here, because our model is going to be symmetrical, we're going to design with symmetry involved. We want to make sure that this object that we're extruding is going to be in the middle of that. And the way you do that is you scroll down from blind and you go up to midplane. So what that does is it's going to split it. It's going to do an equal amount up as well as going down. So we're going to make that 0.25. It's going to be 1/4 inch thick. And it's going to be right in the middle of that top plane. And we have a couple different choices up here. We're going to cover this with a little bit more detail later once you get some SolidWorks under your belt. But we're sketching from the top, sketch plane, but we can sketch with other choices in here too. From a different surface or a plane, from a vertex. If you already have geometry that's in here, you want to put your sketch geometry in one place, but be able to put your extrusion in another place. You could do that too by going to a different surface or a vertex. Or you could do an offset. We could actually do the offset right now. If we want to offset that by, let's say, maybe 1/4 of an inch. Actually, let's make that 1/2 an inch. Now you can see it's taking that sketch geometry, offsetting it by 1/2 an inch, and putting it up here. And we could actually change that direction too, and put it on the bottom. But for now, and we're going to cover more of that later, we're just going to do sketch plane. So we have other options here too when it comes to the direction area. So right now we have midplane selected, but we could also do blind as we did before. It goes off in one direction, or we can change the direction by going to this button over here with the arrow on it, just like we did up here for the from section. And then we could have it go off in that direction. We could do offset also in here too, if we want to do offset from surface or up to surface or other geometry that we might have in here. We don't have that geometry right now, so we're not going to worry about these settings. And again, we're going to go ahead and cover that a little bit later. So we're going to stick to midplane, 1/4 inch, and then we're going to go to the green check mark. We could do this one of two ways. We can go to the green check mark over here on the Properties Manager, right next to the Features Manager, or we can go to the green check mark over here, depending where it's closer to your cursor. Or yet 1/3 option, if you were to right click, you can do OK here. What that does is it rebuilds your model. And let's go and get that centered. And to center this too, if you want to do that, press the F key. F key is fit. And it puts your model right in the middle. So two things we want to do before we call this part done is we want to go ahead and rename our feature down here. We're going to call that base plate, and then we're going to go ahead and save our part. So it's always a good idea, good practice to save your part right away, or maybe do a little bit of work on it, but remember to save your part and do that frequently. But one thing I've noticed with SolidWorks, if you put your model together correctly with a lot of good sketch geometry, you don't have a lot of redundancy in there and things that SolidWorks could get tripped up on. It's a really stable program, and sometimes it's real casual to get real casual about it and not save your part. But do it, save it often. It's just really good practice. One thing you might notice in here is that your part may not look the same as mine. If you take your middle mouse button to depress that and kind of move that around a little bit, it kind of shows the lights are associated with it. But if yours has a little bit more sheen than mine does, it might be because of what your display or view settings might be. So if you go to your heads-up view toolbar up here on the top of your SolidWorks user interface, the graphics area, if you pull that down, you may have or may not have the rear view graphics button depressed. What that does is it kind of approaches kind of a photoreal state. So because this is brass and it's polished brass, you're going to see that it kind of has a little bit of a sheen to it as you move that around. If you don't like that on, if it's slowing your computer down a little bit, which it does slightly, you can go ahead and turn that off. And right now I have mine off too. Let's go to our feature. You can rename all your features and your sketches. Typically in sketches, I kind of leave the names the way they are, sketch 1, sketch 2, or so on and so forth. SolidWorks automatically just incrementally just add another number to that. So as you move down your feature manager tree, all your sketches are going to be in order. But sometimes, like with lofts, when I'm trying to distinguish planes and sketches on those planes, I will actually name those. And with sweeps too, one for the profile, one for the path. But we're going to go ahead and keep our sketch 1, but let's go ahead and rename our Boss Extrude 1 to something that's a little bit more descriptive. And the way you get into that, if you just slowly click on it once, and it should automatically open into that. Sometimes you'll have to click on it twice, but do it slowly. And we're going to call that base plate with a space between it. And now we're ready to save this. So if we go to File, Save As, or just go up here to save it. It's the first time you're saving it. You can go to the Save button up here on the menu bar. And I'm going to call it Hinge Plate 2. I have a couple of other hinge plates in here for various lessons I'm going to be showing you, but I'm going to call that Hinge Plate 2. It's already been saved, but I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it. I'm going to go to Yes. What you want to do is you want to make sure, since this is week 1, you want to make sure that you save it in a folder that might say week 1, but definitely save it in a place that you can find later. Because we're going to be putting not only our part files for the Saros mechanism in that folder, but the assembly and drawing files in there too. So we're going to go to Yes.